What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. You know, every once in a while when I'm out there, I get the question about, Louis, exactly how many bikes do you have? And it's kind of like one of them things that because of what I'm doing with the channel, you'll oftentimes see me on a different bike. But I promise you, it's not as much as you think. And then I was watching some YouTube content and a few channels were doing this stuff where they were kind of like talking about the bikes that they currently have in their fleet. Fleet being the operative word. I mean, like one guy had like 10 or 11 bikes or something like that. And I was like, dadgum, where do you keep all of that stuff? So I decided that's a brilliant idea. And I would really like to do that as well. And one of the things that it did was it made me take inventory of my bikes and their usage and how I feel about them. So much so that I've got a new favorite bike. I didn't even realize that this bike was my favorite bike, but when I describe how I use the bike, you'll see why it is. So I'll introduce you to the bike and I'll talk about the bike build, meaning like what's the frame and fork made out of. I'll talk about the cockpit, the wheel set, some of the componentry that I have on there. Then I'll talk about the group set that I have on the bike. I'll talk about how I use the bike, what it's like to ride the bike. I'll talk about if I could change something about the bike or my least favorite feature about the bike, I'll describe what that is. And then I'll talk about the weight of the bike. Let's jump into this content. What I'm gonna do with it, I'll show the bikes with voiceover just so that it'll go faster that way than me just rambling about the bike. And towards the end of the video, I'll talk about a few bikes that I actually have my hands on and I would like to either own or bring onto the channel in 2025. All right, let's go. Before I jump into the bikes, I gotta acknowledge the guys over at the Nero Show, Chris Miller and Jesse Coyle, for giving my channel a special shout out. Actually, this is the second time that Chris Miller has recognized my channel and acknowledging our content along with other channels as well. That was very nice and very well appreciated, guys.
Lewis Scott, he's down in Florida. He's riding a few bunchies. He's a steel is real man himself, and his niche is very much that. He's likes the finer things in life, clearly. You know, he's got his Bianchis and all the rest of it.
So thanks again for the mention, gents. And I also thought it was pretty cool that they acknowledged Jasper Tan. That's one of the channels that I enjoy watching as well. All right, on with the show. If there's a bike in my fleet that's really associated with the channel, it's this Bianchi Pinella. It has been featured more than any other bike, and it's actually the bike that I've had the longest, and it's been known as my favorite bike. We'll see. The bike is made out of the Dacia EOM 16.5. It's modified for Bianchi as triple-butted boron steel. It comes with a carbon fork that was sourced from a Bianchi FG Lite. The bike is equipped with a Chris King Sottovoce headset, FSA cockpit with Pantini replica stem, Cell Italia saddle, Deda Superleggera seat posts, Campagnolo Bora Ultra tubulars, 35 millimeters in the front, 55 millimeters in the rear, wrapped up in Vittoria Corsa control in 28 millimeters. The group set is a Campagnolo Super Record 11 mechanical, soon to be upgraded as I'm moving all my bikes over to 12 speed. All right, how do I use it? It's one of those bikes that I kind of like use to cleanse my palate, kind of, sort of, because of all the different bikes and wheels and components that I'm featuring and testing on the channel. I don't want to like go too far down like when you know, a modern bike rabbit hole where I lose touch with what I consider to be like essentials of riding, and this bike does a really good job of cleansing my palate and recentering me. I also kind of use it a little bit like a special occasions kind of bike. It's not a trailer queen. I do ride it. I have traveled with it, and I have an upcoming trip that I'm really considering taking this with me. What's it like to ride? Well, it's a steel frame bike that doesn't always feel like a steel frame bike. The characteristics that this bike had reminded me a lot of the Cannondale Cat 10, which I no longer have. And the funny thing about the Cannondale Cat 10 is that that bike doesn't really feel like aluminum. They both feel like on carbon. And when I say it's a performance bike, it is a performance bike. There is just small measures where I can say that my Colnago V3RS is better. The V3RS is obviously It's a modern bike. It's stiffer in certain areas. It's more aerodynamic. And I'll notice things like coming out of a corner, hard acceleration. I'm like, oh man, the V3RS does that a little bit better than this. But believe me, the Pinella is not that far off. So when I consider the feel that I get from this bike, the uniqueness of being able to be on a steel frame and to not be that far off in terms of performance, you can see why I have held it in that high esteem as like my favorite bike for such a long time. Things that I would, well, let's say my least favorite feature is that because it's steel, it can rust. I take care of the bike. I use a judicious amount of frame saver in here. In fact, it's kind of like due for a dose right now. And oh, I have to be very careful with the rear brake cable stops on steel frames. That can become a problem, but that's it. That's my Bianchi Pinella. Next up, more steel. It's been with me for less than 2 years, but it has quickly established itself as a channel staple. I'm talking about none other than the Darkstar steel frame. Holy incomplete bike build, Batman. What do we have going on here? All right, first let me introduce the bike. This is a Darkstar. It's a modern steel frame made out of Columbus Spirit tubing. The reason why the bike is currently sans group set is because I'm in a process of sourcing a Super Record 12-speed for this build. But nonetheless, Columbus Spirit tubing. The fork is a modern tapered fork. It features a 44 millimeter head tube Chris King Inset 7 headset. The wheel set that I have on here are the Elite Drive 45s, if I'm not mistaken, which is like 40 something in the front and 50 something in the rear. But that's kind of like all academic right now. The bike is equipped with a Deda Superleggera cockpit, Deda Superleggero seat post. I think I'm getting that right. And when I had the bike built, it was weighing in right around 16 pounds and a few ounces. Delightful bike to ride. How I use it? It is probably my most practical bike. I'm more likely to grab this than any of the other bikes first. I also like having it with me as a flight companion because it can withstand TSA pretty good. It is good overall at everything as well, whether I'm climbing, long rides, short, fast rides, chill coffee rides, it does it all really well. Like to ride. It feels more like a steel bike than the Pinella does. It performs well, particularly cornering and accelerating. Also, it corners and accelerates more like a modern carbon bike than the Pinella does. I'm talking about in terms of performance, not feel. Albeit with a trade-off. It is a very high performance bike that brings a smile to my face every time I swing a leg over it. The tapered head tube in particular can bring a lot of road harshness through. It can be very stiff over rough pavement, and that's just kind of like one of those features that you have to live with in order to get the performance. My least favorite feature on this bike is that I can get 28 millimeter tires in the back, but I can only get 26 in the front. At some point, I'm considering a fork upgrade, maybe something like an NV or one of the modern Columbus forks, to be able to get 28s in there, because I think that that'll help a lot in terms of some of the rigidity that I get from the bike. The bike does give you a judicious amount of feedback on rough or less than perfect roads that you kind of like wish wasn't always there. And if you go on a really long ride over compromised pavement, that becomes one of the things about this bike that's a little bit annoying. But I think being able to get 28s in the front will do a lot to helping that go away. That's it. That's the only thing that really is like, wish I could change that about the bike. All right, rounding out the rim brake bikes is what's affectionately known as the War Machine. This is my Colnago V3RS rim brake. I love that feature about the bike. The bike weighs 15 pounds on the nose. It is equipped with a Deda Alanera cockpit, a proprietary seat post, Cell Italia SLR Kit Carbonio saddle. The wheel set is the Windspace Hyperloon, 28 millimeter Pirelli tires on there, but I could get 30s on this bike in this build. The group set is a Campagnolo Super Record 12 EPS, and this bike does feature the Campagnolo Power to Max power meter. It's a phenomenal bike to ride. I use it as like if I go out and I feel like there's going to be trouble and I don't want to get dropped, this is the bike that I'm going to bring. What's it like to ride? Despite the performance pedigree, it is remarkably neutral in handling and cornering. It throws no surprises at me, and it is the bike that I'm probably the most relaxed on regardless of the riding situation. If I were to build a custom bike, this is the geometry that I would base it on. Now, when it comes to just like normal group riding, it can get a little bit buzzy over rough surfaces. It gives a lot of feedback over the rough stuff, but it never gets uncomposed. If the bike had a hidden talent, it's jack of all trades. I'm actually allowing you to go faster than you think you're going without putting forth extra effort. The bike is like a cheat code. Like literally when I'm on this, I know that I'm working less than when I'm on other bikes. Worst feature? Seriously? None that I have discovered yet. And that's saying a lot about a bike. Next up is my Cinelli Nemo TIG gravel / all-road build. The weight of this bike is somewhere between 18.5 pounds when I have the road wheel set up and about 20 pounds when I have the gravel wheel set up. The build is a Columbus Spirit tubing plus some sort of mystery tubing, given the frame weight of 2,250 grams. And again, that's just for the frame. The fork is a Columbus full carbon tapered fork. I have a Deda Superleggera stem with a generic Chinese carbon bar, Deda Superleggero seat post, Cell Italia SLR saddle. The wheel set on the gravel build is the Windspace Hyper 700 Grapide wheel set, wrapped in Pirelli Cinturato 40 millimeters. And in road, guys, I'm using a Magine DB508 Ultra on 30 millimeter Vittoria Corsa control. Group set is a mix and match. I have a Campagnolo Record 12 speed set to 1x, Campi Ekar crankset 40 tooth. Then I'm using Juin F1 Hydro Mech brake calipers, Campagnolo Chorus 12 speed chain, SRAM Rival cassette. It all works very well. How do I use it? I put this bike together to be kind of like an all-road monster. I wanted a bike that I would be able to use for the best of both worlds in terms of my usage, meaning that if I were to take this out on a group ride, that I would be comfortable with the right tire setup and I wouldn't be feeling like I was on a bike that had a geometry that was compromising its handling. And conversely, I also wanted a bike that if I got on the gravel, I didn't feel like I had a bike that was not really able to be pushed over the rough stuff because it's too fragile or, you know, too dainty or any of that kind of stuff. And that's one of the reasons why I chose steel. Right after I built the bike, I took the bike out on a relatively fast group ride, and the bike acquitted itself very well in terms of the area of acceleration, cornering, holding pace, and not feeling like the front of center was so long that I felt like my front tire was going to run into the back of the derailleur of the rider in front of me. I was able to draft effectively, which is one of the things that I was going for geometrically with an all-road bike. And then I did an all-out gravel ride for 40 miles with a couple friends where we were hitting it pretty hard. And the bike did everything that I needed to do in terms of gravel and bump absorption, being able to hold pace, changing direction quickly. And then the next ride I did was probably what epitomized how I plan to use this bike more than anything else, which was an all-road ride where went out 35 miles on a gravel, did a little bit of single track, and then we came back in civilization just like on a regular road ride for a total of 70 miles. And the bike did everything really good in both of those environments, holding pace, pace lining, but more significantly, I've had a number of gravel bikes, and this is me getting into how it rides, made out of carbon. And one of the underlying factors, or the two underlying factors with carbon gravel bikes, one of them is carbon kind of mutes what you feel sometimes with rough stuff, but it still gets through to your body. And I have come off of carbon gravel bikes where I just felt beat up after the ride. And the other thing is, oftentimes these bikes just have a geometry that they're great on a gravel, but they're not the best on the road. And it's what I've experienced with some of the gravel rides that I did. But with this bike, when I came off of that type of you know, combination, mixed terrain type of stuff. I felt like the bike performed well in all areas, and perhaps most significantly, I felt fresh after those adventures. So that's what I built it for and how it rides in a nutshell. Great bike. I'm looking forward to experiencing more adventures with this bike. The one disappointment that I had with this, I've already mentioned it, it was the weight of the frame. This being Columbus Spirit tubing, coming in at 2,250 grams was a bit of a disappointment to me, because I expected it to come in maybe around a 2,000 gram weight, because that's actually what they claimed on their website. So I don't know where I am getting that extra 250 grams of build. So that would be the one thing that I would change with this build. And this brings me to the Basso Diamante, which has been visiting with us for a while, so we're going to count it in here. The Basso is a family-owned business that continues to manufacture their full carbon frame and fork in Italy using Toray pre-pregged carbon. The Diamante features Basso's proprietary integrated cockpit, De Levita, and their own seat posts. Cell Italia SLR Kit Carbonio, Super Team S All Carbon Evo wheel set, setup tubeless, and the group set that I currently am running is the Campagnolo Super Record EPS 12-speed for disc, and a recent upgrade from the SRAM Force that I had on there shed some weight and got me gelling with the bike a lot better. Like little things like the timing of my shifting along with my cadence is more appropriate for me with Campagnolo than it is with the SRAM rival system. I'm calling this bike Diamante El Amante. I'll explain why in a minute. It kind of has a little bit of a Rico Suave kind of vibe happening. All right, how do I use it? It's just been the bike that I will grab to use. It's become a little bit of a staple in my stable because it does everything really well. Whether I'm on a short ride, fast ride, long ride, hanging out with friends, this is probably the most practical bike that I have to be able to grab to go do that type of stuff. And the neat thing about it is that it's not a race bike, but it can put the numbers out. Like when I'm on a fast group ride and I've got to hit the corners, I can carry a lot of speed through the corners, and then it has a stiffness and acceleration that makes sure that I can stay on the wheels like I need to without losing too much positioning, having to put out too much effort. And then once I've got it at speed, it stays at speed really, really well. Like I mentioned, it just does everything really, really well without, again, giving you that race bike vibe, which is something that I really appreciate about it. And the reason why I call it Diamante El Amante is because the bike kind of like, it has this old soul, like a sophisticated kind of vibe to it, where it's like anything that you get ready to throw at the bike, you feel like the bike is kind of like, yeah, we've done that before. We're okay with that one too. So yeah, anything that I would change about it, nothing really comes offhand. I like what the bike is designed to do, and I like the way the bike execute what it's doing. That's it. That's my big reveal of my entire bike fleet. I told you guys it was not nearly as many bikes as you thought there were going to be. Yes, there are a couple bits and bobs, frames, wheel sets, full group sets in the garage, stuff like that, but those don't count. I barely included the Darkstar in there because it's not fully built right now, but the primary reason why I wanted to include the Darkstar on there is because, remember I talked about my favorite bike at the beginning? The Darkstar is my favorite bike. When all the bikes are built, more than likely, if I have to go pick a bike to do whatever type of riding, it's going to be the Darkstar because of the way how it looks, the way how it feels, and what I think it epitomizes in terms of cycling, being that it's a steel frame with modern attributes that enhance its performance tremendously. The other thing that I mentioned is bikes that, I know I said bikes that I have my hands on. I meant to say bikes that I have my eyes on, that I'd love to have an opportunity to ride and bring on the channel. One of them is the Bianchi Specialissima, the second modern generation. Yes, with the disc brakes. It's a bike that I've read a lot about, heard a lot about, watched a few videos on it. And I think it's a bike that I would actually enjoy riding a great deal. And I've got my eye on a couple of them. The other bike is a Pinarello Dogma. I wasn't always a big Pinarello fan, but I've kind of like watched the Pinarello Dogma fend off all challengers, and whenever it's involved in a test, it comes out either at the top or near the top. Not necessarily with numbers in terms of aerodynamics and all of that stuff, but in terms of what I consider to be really important, rideability, or, you know, the feel that it gives back to be able to do everything really well. And another bike that is always on my radar screen is a Moots. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to make that happen this year. I would like to permanently add a Moots to the stable. And when I think about the ultimate titanium bike, there are others that are out there that are great and stuff like that, but the Moots is the bike that does it for me. All right, that's where I think I'm gonna leave this. Happy New Year to you all. We have a lot of really neat things in store for this channel. I really appreciate the outpouring of support that the channel has received last year, well, since we've started this, but last year in particular. And we're gonna continue to hopefully produce content that instructs, informs, and inspires. Be blessed, guys.